It was during a 4.5 hour drive to work one Monday morning when it clicked for me. I pulled over to the side of the road and I looked at the beautiful scenery all around me. The sun coming up on the horizon, the mist gently rising from the damp ground, the birds swooping, ducking and diving with abandon in the fields. I slowed down to absorb the scene. The habitual problem-solving thoughts that usually consumed me on a Monday morning faded into the background for once, as I became starkly aware, probably for the first time, of what was missing in my life. I'd been playing the game. I'd played it quite well. I'd had a few victories, but they'd left me with an empty feeling. I've always been really interested in success and what makes people successful. I've read hundreds and hundreds of books over the years, autobiographies, self-help books, business psychology, NLP, sales manuals, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People type books. And I'd learned to apply the techniques in a business and sales environment, and I'd discovered that they worked. I'd discovered how to win. Twice in successive sales roles, I'd risen to the top of the sales force. The second time, it actually took me less than 2 years to achieve record sales figures. I was quickly promoted into management and then senior management roles where, happily, I was able to continue to generate successful results and income for myself and for my employers. Was this the life of the Wolf of Wall Street or Gordon Gekko? Well, no, it wasn't. I was successful in my field. I was more successful than the people working around me, but not exactly an international superstar. I earned good money for the work that I did, but nothing particularly obscene. My sphere of influence gradually grew, but it never extended further than the company I was working for. One thing that has always been important to me is consideration for others. I was always ethical at work. I always acted with the client's best interest at heart. I was always honest. I never sold anything to anyone that they didn't actually need. I treated people who worked with me and latterly for me with dignity. I never wanted to rule the world. I just wanted to do well and do it in the right way. I worked hard. This was certainly one of the reasons for my success, and there's no great secret in that. Hard work normally brings about success. At times of my greatest success, I worked really hard. I skipped holidays, I worked weekends and evenings, spent 3 to 4 nights a week in hotels, and travelled 1,000 miles a week on congested British motorways. I developed a singular purpose for my life, which was to be successful. This was my focus, and I never took my eye off this objective. Was I enjoying my success? Well, the thing is that I thought that I was. I enjoyed the thought of being the top salesperson. I enjoyed looking at my pay slips and my bank statements. They were actually showing positive for the first time in my life. I enjoyed reaching my objectives, and I savoured my success for a couple of minutes, and then my mind would move on to the next thing. New year, new targets, everything starts over again continuously, and I've got to say that at times I was so wrapped up in my objectives, in the workload that came with achieving my objectives, that I didn't look up and look around at all. I had my head down and I never looked up. I lived for at least 10 years like this, with my head down, focused on my objectives. One of my highest values is having fun at work, so I was determined to have fun as well as working hard. As a salesperson, I smiled through my days, and this brought me energy, won me friends, and also won me customers. As a manager, I smiled and I joked until the company finally wiped the smile off my face and told me I couldn't joke and I couldn't smile. As a senior manager, it was made clear to me that smiling and joking at work wasn't appropriate. Year after year, though, I hit my targets and I achieved my objectives, and the sacrifices seemed worthwhile. I was seduced by my own dreams, and the world around me, society, culture, appeared to positively encourage this self-deception. Relaxing proved tricky, I've got to admit. My brain was working overtime, planning future events, working out solutions, running over and rerunning over conversations that I'd had in meetings, phone calls. I was planning conversations that I expected to have in future meetings to ensure that they went my way. There wasn't enough time in the day to do all that I had to do, so I worked evenings and I worked weekends to compensate. When I did take physical time away from work, my mind was still at it. It was whirring away, planning, reviewing. And I have to admit, I self-medicated. A pack of beer seemed to do the trick until the next morning, when my mind would start up again. And I look back now and I realise that I'd started to actually feel tired during the day, and this had never happened to me before. I was always full of energy. It wasn't any surprise that this was happening. I mean, beer in the evening, lack of sleep, an overworked brain, and I wasn't living and working to my highest values. Whenever I took time out for a bit of sport, I'd go on a guilt trip. I'd play a round of golf and feel guilty about all of the work chores that I was neglecting. I played golf and thought of work. I used to think, maybe if I spend my round of golf planning my meetings in my head, then I won't feel so guilty. And this is self-deception, isn't it? Reading for leisure became problematic. In fact, reading at all became problematic. And I loved reading, but if I was reading, then I wasn't working on my backlog of work-related tasks. I would read a page of a book, and then I'd have to reread it as I realised that I hadn't actually been concentrating on what I was reading. I'd read a paragraph, I was deliberately concentrating, and then my mind would be off again, planning and reviewing. I would give it up as a bad job. Watching TV seemed to be more effective in distracting me than reading. I began to spend meetings distracted in my mind. I'd be listening and talking, but my mind would be off somewhere else, working on what I was doing next, prioritising my tasks. I loved having the opportunity to train and coach others. This would actually keep my mind fully occupied. And I could have fun, and at the same time, I was working on one of my highest values, contributing, adding value. During this time, I thought that I was happy. I was being successful, so I must have been happy, right? I was achieving my objectives, my targets and my goals, so, of course, I assumed that I must be happy. Plenty of people actually envied me, wanted what I appeared to have. I was doing everything that it said in the books, and it was working. This was the way that it was supposed to be, wasn't it? Well, why was it then that I started spending my work hours wishing that I could be relaxing, and the hours that I had the opportunity to relax, feeling guilty about not working? It was beginning to dawn on me that I was resenting work, seeing it all as a chore. How could this be? And what was I missing?